Welcome to the mini book podcast, African American Books Edition. The subject of our in-depth discussion today is the book, A Passionate Mind in Relentless Pursuit, The Vision of Mary McLeod Bethune by Noliwe Rooks. We really want to thank you for listening, and please do consider subscribing for future content. After hearing this discussion, we would strongly encourage you to go out and purchase this book and support the author. Now, we must state that the voices for this content sound European, but the content creator is African American and plans on using African American voices in the future. The voices do come from AI, but the content comes straight from the book, and we feel that this is a great way to learn about African American history. So today we are focusing on just a monumental American figure, Mary McLeod Bethune, who lived from 1875 to 1955. For those who might only know her name as an educator or maybe as a historical associate of Eleanor Roosevelt, the sources, they reveal someone completely different. Our mission today is to really understand her as a political theorist, a master strategist, and a visionary architect who fundamentally engineered the Black freedom struggle during the height of the Jim Crow era.
And it's so vital we start there because the author makes his point so clearly that Bethune is often historically overshadowed. This happens even in famous anecdotes where her influence was, paramount. She was a woman of immense power, of true political genius, yet history so often reduces her to a kind of an echo.
An echo, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, she's often framed as sort of the aftermath of events rather than the primary architect who set the entire strategic process in motion in the first place.
That initial surprise, or I guess that initial correction of the historical record, it really centers on a pivotal moment in American history. I'm talking about the first meeting of the Southern Conference for Human Welfare in Birmingham, Alabama, back in November 1938. The author sets the scene with so much tension. So what exactly was this Southern Conference trying to do, and why was Bethune and just getting together considered an act of war by the white establishment?
Well, the context itself was just absolutely explosive. You have to remember, this is the Deep South. The enforcement of segregation was brutal, and it was non-negotiable. And the conference goals for 1938, they were radical.
So what were they discussing?
They were talking about things like reducing the crushing poverty, reforming the entire sharecropping system that trapped Black families in debt.
Which was basically a new form of slavery.
Exactly. They were also talking about improving public education for all citizens, ensuring equitable enforcement of civil rights, and, this was the critical one, repealing the poll tax.
To allow Black citizens to actually vote, to participate in democracy.
Yes. And that right there, that directly challenged the entire economic and social framework of Jim Crow.
So when you challenge that, you're challenging everything.
Everything. When you challenge the disenfranchisement of Black voters and you attack the systems that keep Black labor cheap and suppressed, you are inviting an overwhelming opposition.
And the reaction was immediate.
Immediate. The local press, backed by white supremacist leaders, just charged that the gathering was a front for socialists and communists, and they used that pervasive fear weapon.
Race mixing.
The idea of race mixing was deployed instantly.
And we read that the newspaper articles were actually circulating these warnings, claiming the conference was a ruse to encourage illicit relationships between Black men and white women.
It was pure distilled terror propaganda.
Wow.
It was designed to justify violence. And so when the attendees finally gathered, the entire Birmingham Police Department, led by the notorious Bull Connor.
The Bull Connor.
That's the one. They were out in force, completely encircling the auditorium.
Yeah.
And Connor announced that if anyone failed to segregate apart, meaning Black attendees in one section, white attendees in the other, they'd face immediate arrest.
Now, this is where popular history usually zooms in on Eleanor Roosevelt.
It does. When the First Lady arrived, Mary McLeod Bethune was right there by her side. And Roosevelt, ignoring the police trying to direct her, she went and joined Bethune on the Black side of the room. When the police told her she had to move or she'd be arrested, she produced this small folding chair, placed it right in the middle of the aisle, the official dividing line, and said her famous line, "I refuse to be segregated."
Which is an incredibly powerful, iconic visual. It belongs in the history books.
It absolutely does.
But the book immediately brings us to what it argues is an equally, if not more, crucial moment with Bethune that happened the evening before. And this wasn't about where you sat. It was about defining who you were.
That's right. It happened on the first night when people were sort of tentatively sitting where they wanted before Connor and his police shut it all down. The conference organizer, a white woman named Louise Charlton, called on Bethune to come to the platform, but she did it casually, saying, "Mary, do you wish to come to the platform?"
And Bethune's correction in that environment with that tension, it was an act of profound strategic defiance.
It was incredibly risky, and it was absolutely deliberate. Bethune stood up, and in this clear public voice, she said, "My name is Mrs. Bethune."
And Charlton had to correct herself.
She was forced to correct herself publicly. The author emphasizes that this was not trivial. In Jim Crow, Alabama, in 1938, a black woman publicly correcting a white woman on a matter of respect that risked severe consequences.
Up to physical violence, I imagine.
Physical violence, certainly economic blacklisting. He was essentially forcing the white establishment to acknowledge her dignity, her earned status, not as a child, not as a servant, but as a fully mature, accomplished woman.
By using the title Mrs.
Precisely. By forcing the use of Mrs. Bethune, she was asserting that erasing the color line involved more than just where you sat. It meant respecting the fundamental identity and titles of black leaders.
Right.
She was confirming that true freedom required demanding the name to which she chose to answer, that assertion of personal dignity. That was the prerequisite for all the political strategy that followed. It was a big dividing line in the struggle for respect and power.
That moment, it required such a foundation of personal fortitude, of education and community backing. So let's move into how she actually built that foundation, starting with her roots and her first major act in Florida. Her early life really is a central context for understanding that relentless drive. She was born in 1875, just a decade after emancipation, in Maysville, South Carolina.
She was the 15th of 17 children. And here is the key fact, the thing that shaped everything. She was the first one born free, not as enslaved property.
Wow.
And that reality, it profoundly shaped her entire belief system, her deep, unshakable faith in education. It came from her first time sitting in a classroom at age 12.
So to her, education wasn't an option.
Not at all. It wasn't a luxury. It was the absolutely necessary tool required to ensure the physical and economic safety of black people as they navigated this violently racist path toward freedom and citizenship.
And that belief, it led her pretty quickly to her major foundational act, establishing the Daytona Literary and Industrial Institute in 1904 in Daytona, Florida. The popular image is, it's a bit romanticized, isn't it? The book makes it clear she started with basically nothing.
Less than nothing, you could argue. She arrived with little more than $1.50 in capital.
$1.50.
$1.50. The location she chose for the school was in the heart of Daytona's black community, which was completely neglected by city services. No street lights, no functional sewage, hardly any sidewalks.
And the early struggles were just harrowing.
Harrowing is the word. The cabin she got was dilapidated, the wood was rotted, the roof leaked constantly, food was always scarce.
The anecdotes about her resourcefulness are just remarkable, haunting the city dumps for supplies.
She literally salvaged everything. She haunted the city dumps, the trash piles behind local hotels, getting discarded linen, cracked dishes, old lumber, just to keep the school running.
And the school supplies themselves.
She detailed using charred splinters, burnt pieces of wood as pencils, and then mashing up elderberries to make ink. She and her students were often hungry. The sheer struggle of the school's existence was, in itself, this defiant argument for black dignity and empowerment.
The institution she built was so brilliant because it wasn't just teaching reading and writing, was it?
No.
It was this fusion of academics, vocational training, community uplift, and, crucially, entrepreneurship.
That holistic vision was completely strategic. It recognized that survival required economic self-sufficiency. So yes, students got an academic education, but they also learned vocational skills, cooking, tailoring, industrial trades. And the school served as the central community institution and, critically, a political hub.
Even the tuition structure shows her commitment to the community's economic reality.
Absolutely. Tuition was set at 50 cents a week if you could afford the cash. But she knew cash was scarce, so she readily accepted payment in kind.
Chickens, eggs.
Chickens, eggs, produce, whatever a family could possibly spare. She was building an institution that was completely inseparable from the economic life of the black community around it.
But to grow, to get state accreditation, she had to be a strategic hirer.
Oh, yes. She brought on Francis Reynolds Kaiser, a graduate of Hunter College, who took over the entire educational program. She made sure the academics were rigorous enough for accreditation.
And she also brought someone in for the vocational side.
Yes. She hired Portia Smiley to supervise the domestic science program, which provided essential vocational skills and practical nursing experience. This wasn't just about getting help. It was about assembling a competent professional team to build a truly comprehensive institution.
And for me, the most compelling part of this foundational period is how quickly that education translated directly into political power. She was teaching reading specifically to get around voter suppression.
That's the key connection. The school offered night classes for adults who needed to pass the literacy tests required to vote. But it went further. The students and staff, they immediately engaged in direct political action.
Oh, so.
They organized fundraisers, bake sales, social events to raise the money needed to pay the poll taxes for community members, people who wanted to vote but just couldn't afford that fee.
So a bake sale wasn't just a social event. It was a tool of political enfranchisement.
It was an act of civic defiance, and it was financed by community sacrifice. And it didn't stop there. When her students in the community couldn't get adequate health care because white hospitals either refused them or gave them substandard care, she didn't lobby or wait for the city.
She just built one.
She established the first hospital for Black people in the state of Florida. Her strategy unified education, entrepreneurship, mutual aid, and electoral politics into one seamless shield against white supremacy.
Building a hospital from scratch in a deeply segregated city, it just underscores the desperation of that era and the absolute audacity of her response.
It speaks to her recognition that the Black community had to be self-sufficient just for basic survival. If you can't vote, you have no leverage for city services. If you can't get medical care, you die. If you can't read, you can't challenge the legal system. Bethune saw these as interlocking threats, and the school was her primary tool to fight all of them at once.
And that unified strategy was really tested to its limits starting around 1920. This required extraordinary physical courage. We have to talk about her direct confrontations with the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah, this period follows the passage of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. Bethune immediately set about organizing Black women in Florida to pay the poll tax and register for upcoming elections.
And this was exceptionally dangerous work.
Exceptionally. We have to put this in context. Florida's environment at the time was horrific. Between 1882 and 1930, over 260 Black Floridians were lynched. It was one of the highest rates in the nation. Her organizing directly threatened the white power structure.
And the poll tax was this major economic barrier to citizenship. Her message to the community about it was just uncompromising.
It was a call for sacrifice and a reordering of priorities. She implored her community, eat your bread without butter, but pay your poll tax. Nobody ever told me to pay my poll tax. My dollar is always there on time.
So it's about defiance over fear.
Absolutely. She preached, do not be afraid of the Klan, quit running, hold your head up high. The instruction was crystal clear. Civil participation and citizenship came before your personal comfort.
And the Klan, predictably, targeted her school. They threatened to burn it to the ground if she didn't stop her voter registration drives.
Yes, the threat was explicit. On the night they promised to arrive, the Klan reached out to sympathetic city officials who, as an act of intimidation, had all the streetlights turned off, plunging the entire area into darkness.
So you have 80 or so hooded Klan members riding on horseback toward the school in total darkness.
That's the scene.
The way she responded to that darkness strategically is what makes the story so powerful.
She fought the darkness with light, both physical and moral light. She ordered her staff to turn on every single light on the grounds and in all the buildings.
So when the Klan entered the gates,
they weren't met by a cowering, fearful group hiding in the dark. They were met with Bethune, standing illuminated, a powerful visual presence, flanked by 150 students, staff, and teachers who were singing the hymn, God Will Take Care of You.
Was this just an act of pure courage, or was there a tactical advantage to forcing the Klan to act in full view?
It was both, and that is the strategic genius of it. In the darkness, the Klan could operate with impunity. They were confident their actions would be hidden, unaccountable.
Right.
By turning on every light, Bethune forced visibility onto their act of terror. She implicitly dared them to commit violence under the light, in front of 150 witnesses, and potentially risk the backlash of northern philanthropists who supported her school. She took away the cover of night.
And what was the result?
The white supremacists. They just rode in one gate, not the other. They left without any violence. But Bethune wasn't finished. The next morning, she cemented the victory. She led a procession of 100 Black women to the polls to vote for the very first time. They were forced to wait for hours, knowing that if they left the line, they'd forfeit their vote. But she proudly ended the story by saying, "But we voted."
That experience must have profoundly shifted her political thinking. The book says she evolved from focusing on changing individual behavior to changing systemic, social, economic, and political institutions. Can you break down what that shift meant for her ideology?
Well, she started as a bit of a transitional figure, grounded in that 19th century belief that black advancement would come mainly through respectability politics.
So focusing on moral uplift, education, demonstrating good behavior to earn white acceptance.
Exactly. But these constant violent confrontations with Jim Crow and the KKK showed her that was not enough. By the 1920s, she recognized that individual effort could only go so far when the entire system, the legal, the economic, the political infrastructure, was designed to suppress you.
So she shifted to a structural analysis.
Yes, she realized that true freedom required dismantling the system itself, not just polishing an individual's behavior within it.
And this structural analysis led to a particularly devastating critique of segregation, and she framed it not just as a moral failing, but as an economic blunder.
This is where her pragmatism is just brilliant. She argued in the late 1920s that the commitment to black inferiority was, and I'm quoting, stubbornly in defiance of the basic tenets of capitalism.
So she was framing white supremacy as a liability to capitalism itself.
Yes. She quantified the tremendous measurable cost to the Commonwealth of denying black communities basic services, drainage, street light, sanitation, paved roads, and the cost of denying justice in the courts.
So she wasn't just saying segregation is immoral, she was saying it's economically inefficient. It's fundamentally bad for business. That's a powerful tool to use against people who only respect the bottom line.
Exactly. She understood that if you want to motivate certain sectors of the white elite, you have to show them how their racist policies are hurting their own pocketbooks and the overall economic growth of the region. And this economic argument became a central part of her strategy when she moved to the national stage.
That comprehensive view explains why she became such a powerhouse in national organizing. She was involved in pretty much every major civil rights organization of the time. The list is long. The NAACP, the Urban League, the ASALH, the UNCF, the NDCWC, and of course founding the NCNW. Can we briefly break down what these groups were and what the NCNW's purpose was?
Yeah, it's important not to get lost in the alphabet soup. So the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, focused mainly on legal strategy and legislative advocacy. The Urban League focused on economic opportunity and labor issues. The ASALH was Carter G. Woodson's group, dedicated to historical scholarship, preserving black history. And the UNCF, the United Negro College Fund, focused on fundraising for HBCUs.
And the ones she was most involved with, the NACWC and the NCNW.
The NACWC, the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs, was dedicated to community service and social reform, often very local. But the organization she founded, which became her primary political vehicle, was the NCNW, the National Council of Negro Women.
And what was its goal?
It was an umbrella organization specifically designed to unite the vast but often fractured power of black women's groups all over the country. It centralized their political voice, giving them unprecedented lobbying power at the federal level.
The book uses a very powerful specific term for her role, a race woman. Given how language changes, we need to make sure our listener understands what that identity meant back in the 1920s and 30s.
Right. The term race man, or race woman, held tremendous cultural weight in that era. It wasn't a biological term. It described a specific, chosen political identity among successful black leaders. Dr. Janetta Cole, who was one of Bethune's students, explained it as the fundamental understanding that success, wealth, or influence, in Bethune's case, educational and political influence, required service and responsibility to the entire black community across all class lines.
So if you achieved success, you weren't free to just enjoy it for yourself. Your success was a resource to be used for the collective safety and advancement of the race.
Precisely. Bethune embodied this. She viewed her personal achievements, her education, her political contacts, her financial stability, not as personal spoils, but as leverage points for collective safety and advancement. She felt she had no choice but to be of service, which is why she could juggle so many roles and organizations all at once.
Moving from that intense struggle in Florida to Washington, D.C., we see her elevate that structural strategy to the federal level. She becomes the ultimate inside player in FDR's administration, and this transition was heavily facilitated by her close partnership and friendship with Eleanor Roosevelt.
That friendship was one of the most significant interracial political collaborations of the 20th century. And again, it began with a powerful public refusal of segregation, even before the famous Birmingham incident.
Oh, really?
Yes, back in 1927, Bethune was invited to a luncheon hosted by Eleanor Roosevelt. And when the white women there refused to be seated at the same table as Bethune, Roosevelt immediately intervened.
What did she do?
She placed Bethune directly beside her at the table and announced that anyone who objected to the seating arrangement was free to leave. That decision wasn't just a social nicety. It forged a powerful, decades-long political alliance built on mutual respect and a shared defiance of Jim Crow. This access, it became Bethune's greatest strategic asset.
And Bethune's influence grew to the point where she served under 3 presidents: Coolidge, Hoover, and most importantly, FDR. But her key federal appointment under FDR, that became her greatest strategic lever.
That was her appointment as Director of the Division of Negro Affairs in the National Youth Administration, or NYA. The NYA was created in 1936, a part of the Works Progress Administration, a major Depression-era program. The agency was designed to funnel federal relief money, training, and jobs to young people aged 16 to 25.
That sounds powerful, but how did she use it to achieve structural change beyond just, handing out funds?
Well, she lobbied the agency so aggressively and effectively that she earned a full-time staff position in 1938. And in that role, she became the first Black person ever to head a federal division and, at the time, was the highest-paid Black person in the U.S. government.
Wow.
She leveraged this power by aggressively ensuring that Black youth received their equitable share and often more of the NYA resources.
Can you give us some detail on how she actually deployed that power through the NYA?
Sure. She championed the creation of 5 special camps for Negro girls in states like New Jersey and the Carolinas, specifically targeting unemployed single Black women. This was groundbreaking. The camps were strategically located on the campuses of Black colleges, which gave much-needed financial benefits to those institutions.
So it was a double benefit.
A triple benefit, really. Because beyond providing work-study funds and vocational training, where Black students got the exact same daily stipend of $6 as white students, the camps mandated classes in civics and Black history.
So she's not just providing economic relief, she's building a new, politically conscious generation of Black female citizens, while at the same time shoring up HBCUs.
It was a multi-pronged strategic masterstroke. Through the NYA Special Negro Fund, she assisted close to 300,000 Black youth. This paved the way for thousands of young Black women to access workforce training and secure jobs that were otherwise completely denied to them. She was using federal money to bypass local segregation laws and build community infrastructure from the inside out.
And beyond her individual role, she institutionalized this inside influence by organizing the Federal Council of Negro Affairs, what became famously known as the Black Cabinet.
This was perhaps her most brilliant organizational move in Washington. The Black Cabinet was a coalition of Black federal employees. Many of them had low official rank, but they had deep connections to Black communities all over the country. This group served as an informal but highly effective advisory board to the Roosevelt administration.
So how did an informal group wield that much power? I mean, enough to reshape decades of political allegiance, shifting the Black vote from being reliably Republican to becoming a bulwark for the Democratic Party.
The mechanics were about communication and coordination. First, they provided unfiltered information about the reality of Jim Crow and the New Deal shortcomings directly to the President and First Lady, bypassing the often racist state and local Democratic parties.
So they were a direct line.
A direct line. Second, they ensured that strategically, New Deal policies were adapted and directed to Black communities. They met often, usually in Bethune's office or her home, and they created a unified agenda. This coordination gave the Black community tangible reasons to support FDR relief money, jobs, access, demonstrating that the Democratic Party was finally serving their interests. Bethune was the chair, unifying all these voices and exercising power intelligently.
Speaking of strategically directed power, her work in founding the Tuskegee Airmen Initiative is just a stunning example of leveraging a tiny federal program for massive structural military integration.
It absolutely is. She began this work back in 1938, targeting FDR's new civilian pilot training program, the CPTP. Her initial goal seemed modest enough, just to ensure Black colleges, like Tuskegee, were included in the program to get funding and benefits for the schools and their students.
But the ultimate vision was always much, much bigger than just training pilots.
Her ultimate goal was to use this program as a non-negotiable stepping stone toward integrating the U.S. military, which was rigidly segregated. She knew that if Black colleges trained excellent pilots, and if the U.S. entered the war, the military would have a powerful, pragmatic reason to overlook segregationist opposition.
And once again, she leveraged her most powerful connection, Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yes, she needed that ultimate visible endorsement. So in 1941, Despite stern objections from the Secret Service, who were worried about the First Lady's safety and the political backlash, Eleanor Roosevelt visited Tuskegee Institute's Moton Field. And she asked the chief flight instructor, Charles Anderson, to take her up in a plane.
This sounds like a calculated public relations coup.
It was magnificent political theater. It's potentially the first time a black pilot flew alone in the South with a white woman in this very public context. Roosevelt spent over an hour flying around.
And the publicity.
The publicity and the proven success of the training program were immediately leveraged by Roosevelt and Bethune to pressure FDR. They showed him a successful, racially integrated training pipeline that simply could not be dismissed.
Which eventually led to Executive Order 9279, mandating the formation of the Black Pilot Unit, and ultimately laid the groundwork for President Truman to integrate the military in 1948.
That's correct. The pilots trained at those black colleges became the foundation for the famed Tuskegee Airman Squadron that flew in World War II. It just shows Bethune's ability to connect a micro-level educational policy decision to macro-level military integration goals. Her vision was always about structural change.
Our journey now takes us back to Florida, where Bethune implemented another essential component of her strategic map, fostering black capital and community through the creation of black-owned beach resorts. This was about asserting economic independence and securing physical space for black survival.
This strategy reveals Bethune as a deep pragmatist. She understood that black capital and economic development were necessary bulwarks against Jim Crow. Since local laws in Florida banned black people from accessing most of the state's beautiful beaches, there was this desperate need for places that offered relaxation and recreation without humiliation.
So if the state wouldn't provide the space, the black community had to buy it.
They had to buy it themselves.
The first major example of this is American Beach, founded in 1935.
American Beach was established primarily by Abraham Lincoln Lewis, who was the founder of the Afro-American Insurance Company, a powerful black-owned financial institution. Bethune was heavily involved, serving on the company's board.
So it was financed by black capital.
Crucially, yes, financed partly through black insurance capital, which gave it a strong financial footing, and the community was explicitly designed to be a democratic caste, ensuring that black citizens from all walks of life, a maid or a doctor, could own property right next to one another, all financed by black institutions.
The goal was self-determination, supported by black financial power. But then we get to Bethune Beach, which she founded herself in the early 1940s after her own students were ordered off Daytona Beach. This project sounds much more precarious.
It was a far harder undertaking because she lacked the institutional financial backing that Lewis's insurance company had. Bethune purchased 2.5 miles of beachfront property in Volusia County, south of Daytona. The original mortgage was a staggering $132,000.
Which is over $2 million today.
It's an incredible sum.
And the political obstacles were designed to crush her economically.
Absolutely. White county officials stalled or just outright refused to provide essential municipal services like water, sewage, paved roads. This forced the founders to spend an estimated private sum of $200,000 just to get utilities connected.
They were deliberately using bureaucratic tools to make black economic self-sufficiency impossible.
Exactly. This links right back to her earlier critique of segregation as an economic liability. The white system would rather deny services to everyone than see black people prosper.
And the financial model she was forced to use to sell plots of land put black investors at tremendous risk. The book calls these installment contracts. We should really explain what made these so predatory.
Yes, that explanation is essential. An installment contract, which is often a precursor to what we now call a balloon mortgage, is highly exploitative. The buyer makes monthly payments, sometimes for years, and takes possession of the land. But, and this is the key, the seller retains the actual legal deed to the property until the very last payment is made.
So what happens if the buyer misses a single payment?
This is the predatory core of it. If the buyer misses even one monthly payment, they forfeit the contract. That means they lose the property, and they forfeit every single dollar they have already invested into that property over the previous years.
So you could pay for years, miss one payment, and lose everything.
Everything. It was a mechanism that disproportionately stripped black investors of their property and their life savings, forcing them into a constant state of financial terror.
And this struggle was happening in a region still reeling from just immense racial violence.
The risk was constant. Just a few years earlier, in 1939, Bethune had spoken out against the horrific lynching of Lee Snell, a black veteran in Daytona who was murdered in broad daylight. The killers were acquitted despite 7 witnesses.
Unbelievable.
Bethune wrote publicly, "We are crushed, but we are not discouraged."
Uh,
She wanted Bethune Beach to be an established space where residents could congregate without the fear of harassment, a refuge from that pervasive violence.
but ultimately, the financial weight of the mortgage, coupled with the systemic denial of services, it proved too heavy, which led to her desperate public plea.
By the summer of 1952, she issued a public SOS call to the Negro citizens of America, pleading for help to satisfy the final $89,000 mortgage obligation. And her plea underscored the deep meaning of the land. She said, "If the property is to be saved for Negroes of our own and future generations, we must immediately satisfy this mortgage obligation."
This whole struggle over land ownership, it connects to a much deeper ancestral trauma in the Black American experience, doesn't it?
It does. It ties directly back to General Sherman's failed Special Field Order Number 15, the famous promise of 40 acres and a mule, which was quickly overturned. Land ownership symbolized true freedom and stability. And what's more, American Beach was located near Amelia Island, a site linked to the violent history of the slave trade, where thousands of enslaved Africans were thrown overboard and drowned.
So these beach endeavors, they weren't just about sunbathing.
Not at all. They were highly charged political and spiritual acts, asserting the right to land and to peace on the very soil of their ancestors.
As Bethune neared the end of her life, her scope expanded beyond national borders to the global stage. She recognized that the Jim Crow struggle was intrinsically linked to these worldwide movements for human rights and peace. This brings us to the United Nations Charter Conference in San Francisco in 1945.
Yes, she served as a non-governmental delegate there after lobbying President Truman, once again via Eleanor Roosevelt. Bethune's core mission was to urge the new international body to denounce colonialism. She wanted to explicitly link the denial of civil rights for Black Americans at home to the denial of human rights for colonized people in Africa and Asia.
So she was connecting the struggles.
She was very clear. As long as Africans were subjected to white colonialism, African Americans stood little chance of overcoming white supremacy.
It sounds like an early, powerful articulation of a global Black liberation perspective, but there was immediate internal friction among the U.S. delegates.
There was significant tension, particularly with her male colleagues, Walter White, the NAACP president, and W.E.B. Du Bois. You see, Bethune had been invited in her capacity as a vice president of the NAACP, but she insisted on registering as a representative of the organization she founded, the National Council of Negro Women.
Why was that distinction so critical for her?
She wanted to secure a seat at the world table specifically for Black womanhood. She was absolutely insistent that the unique political and social experience of Black women be heard on the international stage.
And her colleagues didn't agree.
When White and Du Bois later excluded her from their joint statement denouncing colonialism, she was reportedly furious. She recognized it as a deliberate sidelining of her voice and the voice of the NCNW.
But she took that exclusion and through sheer strategic force turned it into an opportunity to champion global women of color.
That is the ultimate Bethune move. Instead of resigning in anger, she held her own press conference. She reiterated her support for an international movement, but explicitly framed the gender tension as a political necessity. She insisted that if she was forced to resign her position, she would make sure to give it to another woman.
By doing that, she's essentially creating a political precedent. She's ensuring that Black women will have a voice in global affairs, regardless of whether the established, male-led organizations grant them one.
Exactly. The book notes she turned the critique of her actions into an opportunity to champion global women of color, arguing that this position, quote, allowed Black women to espouse a majority position in a society that had otherwise discounted their ideas as insignificant. She was securing a permanent space for Black women's collective action on the world stage.
After the UN conference in her final years, she turned inward, embracing this profound philosophical shift toward the moral rearmament movement, or MRA. What was the core of this movement, and why did it appeal to her after decades of political campaigning?
She found a deep spiritual reawakening at an MRA conference in Switzerland. The moral rearmament movement was an international, non-denominational, spiritual, and ethical movement centered on 4 absolute moral principles: absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love.
It sounds like a rejection of pure political pragmatism in favor of moral transformation.
It was a fascinating shift. Bethune came to believe this ideology could achieve global peace and dismantle oppression in a way that laws alone simply could not. After working so hard for legislative change, the New Deal, civil rights bills, she realized that laws could mandate behavior, but they couldn't change the bitterness in the human heart.
Right.
She told one interviewer that she had seen a spirit in the MRA movement that could implement the recent legislation on segregation and make it work. Laws alone can never remove the hates and bitterness from the human heart.
That introspection led to a very humanizing and painful public confession, which forces us to acknowledge the incredible personal toll her ambition exacted on her.
It's one of the most striking moments of her life story. When she spoke at the MRA assembly in Ka, she confessed her imperfections, publicly expressing deep regret for having neglected her only son, Albert, due to her overwhelming ambition and commitment to her work.
Wow.
She lamented having to leave him in the care of others, while she, in her words, tramped all over America looking for nickels, dimes, dollars, and quarters.
That confession, it really forces us to acknowledge the impossible calculus that high-achieving women, especially Black women navigating Jim Crow, had to face. It wasn't just a political struggle, it was a profound personal sacrifice.
It is the human cost of being a race woman.
Yeah.
And her public sharing of that regret was part of her final philosophical evolution, recognizing that the struggle for moral perfection and systemic change begins at home.
Before her death in May 1955, she compiled her accumulated wisdom, which she titled My Last Will and Testament. She was bequeathing principles, not material wealth, to future generations.
This testament really serves as her final map for the Black freedom struggle. Let's focus on the 3 key principles she left for you, the listener. First, she left love. She stressed that love builds fellowship, and crucially, it requires forgiving your enemies. She was aiming for a world of justice built on human connection, where no man's skin or color is held against him.
And the second principle?
Second, she left hope. She believed deeply in the eventual triumph of the spirit. She envisioned a new, unhindered Negro who would rise from 330 years of ceaseless striving. Hope, for her, wasn't passive waiting. It was the engine that sustained a relentless pursuit.
And finally, she left respect for the uses of power, which connects directly back to her entire life as a strategist.
Yes, she stated that intelligently directed power leads to more freedom. She urged future generations to choose leaders who are wise, courageous, and of great moral stature. Her entire life, from Daytona to the White House, was an illustration of how to acquire and deploy power strategically, and that was the last lesson she wanted to pass on.
Mary McLeod Bethune understood that the fight for freedom included a fight against historical erasure. Her final legacy includes this relentless drive for commemoration, ensuring that Black history was literally cemented into the landscape for future generations.
She fought actively to preserve the homes of Black leaders like Frederick Douglass and Carter G. Woodson. She saw these physical sites as historical breadcrumbs, necessary signposts for future generations, acting as a bulwark against the institutional forgetting that white supremacy relied upon.
And the ultimate realization of this drive is in her 2 statues in Washington, D.C., which speak volumes about her enduring significance. Let's start with the 1974 memorial in Lincoln Park.
That statue, dedicated by the NCNW on what would have been her 99th birthday, was a major grassroots-funded effort, and its placement and design were highly symbolic. It deliberately replaced the passive, kneeling slave monument that had stood in that park for nearly a century.
So what does Bethune's monument depict, and what message did that convey?
Bethune is shown standing 12 feet high, passing her legacy, which is represented by a scroll to 2 9-foot-tall children. The message was unmistakable. Freedom was not linked to the benevolent actions of a white president, as the old monument suggested, but was rooted in Black education, participation, and agency. It was a national declaration, cementing the role of Black women as the central connective force in the history of Black people in America.
And the more recent monument, unveiled in Statuary Hall in 2022, holds an even deeper layer of symbolic resonance for the state of Florida.
The 2022 marble statue is astonishing. It's carved from the same vein of pure white statuary marble that Michelangelo used for David. But the profound significance lies in what it replaced.
Right.
He was chosen by Florida citizens to displace the likeness of Confederate General Edmund Kirby Smith, an ardent defender of white supremacy and a KKK member who had represented the state in the Capitol since 1922.
So the state of Florida symbolically replaced a Confederate general and white supremacist with a Black woman born to former slaves. That is a potent, visible repudiation of the racist past.
It is the ultimate assertion of citizenship and historical justice. That transition represents a powerful declaration that the country is finally starting to acknowledge the true architects of freedom.
So, if we look at Bethune's lifelong fight for dignity in political space, how does that strategic map connect directly to our current struggles, like the 2014 Ferguson protests that are mentioned in the book?
The connection lies in the persistence of heroic individualism and, more importantly, collective action. There's this photograph of 18-year-old Cheyenne Green struggling with a larger white man over an American flag during the Ferguson protests, and it mirrors Bethune fighting the KKK decades earlier. It's a moment of profound individual resistance against the theft of dignity.
But the narrative expands, showing the power of community, much like Bethune's reliance on organized Black womanhood.
Exactly. The second image captures Cheyenne Green's mother, Tiny, stepping in. And Tiny explained that the confrontation escalated when the man spat in her daughter's face. She described her reaction. That's the absolute worst thing you can do when you spit on another human being. At that time, there was no more being peaceful. Her stepping in, even though it led to their arrest, demonstrates Bethune's enduring truth. There is essential strength in numbers, there's always a reason to hope, and there is a necessity to resist the theft of our identity, our community, our bodies, our spirits, our being.
Mary McLeod Bethune's lifelong dedication to organized Black womanhood and her relentless pursuit of education and political power provided a clear roadmap. She ensured that each generation would not have to recreate the strategy for liberation from scratch.
Indeed, her commitment to education, to building Black capital, and to the intelligent organization and deployment of women's political power. It remains a foundational structure for anyone seeking to build a more equitable world.
That is a masterful portrait of a life lived in relentless pursuit of freedom and dignity. Mary McLeod Bethune's legacy is truly an essential map for strategic, organized movement. To our listener, we hope this discussion has illuminated the genius and grit of this extraordinary figure. We ask you now to subscribe and tell others about this program, and also please suggest in the comments books that they would like to hear in future episodes. Thank you for subscribing and listening. 5 seconds of silence.